Our first two speakers today, Correa and Tucker Frawley, have collaborated on infield play for several years, including Friday Fielders. Correa was hired as minor league infield coach for the Cleveland Indians prior to spring training last year after spending 4 years as an assistant coach at the University of Northern Colorado. Frawley is entering his 12th year at Yale University and his 8th season serving as associate head coach. Some of Frawley's main duties include coaching the Bulldogs infielders, preparing the team defense, and player development. Please join me in welcoming Kai and Tuck to the stage.
Morning, everybody. A lot of stuff that we're going to roll into today, so we're going to dive right into this. And considering all the stuff that Kai and I kind of want to touch upon today, we thought a good place to start was more or less speaking to some overall and shared structure, and more or less just giving everybody a sense of what we ultimately want the finished product to look like from a pure skill set standpoint. So with that in mind, here are the 5 areas that at least we at Yale try to delve into every day. All right, these are the 5 areas that we believe if we tap into regularly and ultimately get our guys to do at a high level come game day, that we're just going to be putting ourselves in a pretty good position as an infield core relative to our defense as a whole. So I'm going to delve into all 5 of these topics as quickly as I can here. The first of which is this concept of just consistently finding what we call the glove sweet spot. All right, and all we're trying to do here is just develop really good pocket awareness. And we're trying to do that by defining in really simple but really specific terms the part of our hand and the part of our glove that we see as being the place that just makes us quickest, cleanest, and most consistent. And the more video we've watched, the more we've slowed it down, and the more dialogue we've had with our infielders, we've been able to identify the index finger. And if we really want to get specific, the tip of that index finger is the place that we want to square up every single ball. A lot of parallels can be drawn to the barrel of a hitter's bat. In the same way that hitting coaches want to develop hitters who have a knack at consistently finding that barrel with every swing that they take, well, we as infield coaches want to develop infielders who have a knack at consistently finding that good part of their glove. We also want to be comfortable throwing from a wide range of arm slots. Pretty common theme, I'd say, amongst most infield coaches. We just take a little different tact in how we teach it to our guys. We spend a little less time talking about the arm itself and a little more time talking about the role that posture plays and the impact that it has on the arm. So what I mean by that is, if I throw with really tall, upright posture, I'm naturally going to rotate and pass through a much higher window and use a higher slot than when I throw with a little bit more upper body tilt. When I do that, I'm naturally going to use a lower slot. So the question then becomes, all right, well, what role does posture play in infield play? And the answer to that is every ground ball that I get in the infield, it's going to have a certain route that I take. And depending on the distance of that route, it's going to create a certain amount of momentum that's either taking me towards my target or away from it. And if that momentum's taking me away from my target, I got to find a way to break it, or at least offset it. And my posture's a way, amongst some others, of helping me do that and throw with just a little bit more balance. So what my goal is as an infield coach is to essentially create a practice environment that demands and taps into that full spectrum of postures. If I'm able to do that, and if I'm able to do that appropriately, not only am I going to work on all those slots that we as infield guys like to talk about, but I'm going to do it in a way that makes my infielders really familiar with how and when to use them, which I think is just as important. We also want to be comfortable fielding across all of our lanes. We want to be as confident securing a ball with one hand or to our backhand side as we are with two. There are some things I think that are unique to each one of these lanes that are worth mentioning because they inevitably work their way into our practice design. Our two-hand lane is somewhat of a luxury lane, I call it. It speaks more than anything to the job our feet have done, taking us to a spot that allow our hands to work in tandem. Okay? We do lose a little bit of range and reach when we take two hands to things. I think that's important to note. But again, it speaks to the job our feet have done, taking us to a spot that allows them to work that way. Our backhand serves a couple different purposes. The first is more on a reactionary level. So balls that are either hit so hard that I don't have enough time to get in front of them, or hops that I'm attacking so hard that, again, I don't have enough time to get in front of them. But it's also a distance cutting lane. So maybe I do have the ability to get in front of that ball, but for the sake of cutting distance, cutting time, and making a play a little bit more probable, and in some cases even possible, sometimes I choose to catch an exchange on that side of my body. Last but not least is our one-handed lane. We refer to it as our reaching lane. We actually try to stay away from calling it our glove side or our forehand lane because we don't want our guys to think of it as solely a lateral lane. It's as much north-south as it is to the side and everywhere in between. And that's essentially what that yellow area kind of represents. And all of those yellow areas, for that matter, are areas that we're very cognizant about either confining ourselves to or stretching ourselves out to over the course of our practice setting, just because we feel like they're very relevant to what the game demands. We also got to be good at reading and recognizing a variety of hops, okay? We throw hops into one of three categories, the classic two being long hops and short hops, but we also have a third category called snakes, which are just lower trajectory hit balls that don't have that discernible hop or bounce, all right? We got to react to those appropriately as well. We kind of consider this a two-phase process. The first of which is we want to get our eyes to the side of the ball as quickly as we can. There's obviously going to be certain balls that are hit at angles and directions that do that job for us, but we need to be ready for the plays that are a little bit more demanding on our lower half, that force our lower half to just work a little harder to get our eyes to a vantage point where they can read pace and read trajectory in a little bit better way than if I was directly in line of that moving ball. All right, and that's all that graphic in the lower left kind of represents. And all the while here, we're just preparing ourselves for that last 15 to 20 feet. We kind of call that our decision-making window. What our eyes see in that last 15 to 20 feet is going to be what dictates what our hands, our feet, and our bodies as a whole do. Last but not least, we want to hone our internal clock. We do it in the practice setting in a few different ways. The first of which is with runners. The classic way for us was always to get our outfielders and pitchers to hustle down the line at the crack of a fungo bat. But we've actually seen a ton of worth in setting up a hack attack machine, allowing it to swivel, and asking those same runners to swivel it themselves, feed it, then run down the line. It gets fun, it gets creative, and most importantly, the times down the line tend to be a little bit more game-like. If you don't have the luxury of utilizing runners, and you're relegated to utilizing a stopwatch, classic way has always been to set a time and to ask your infielders to make and finish a play underneath that time. All right, we've actually seen a ton of worth in supplementing that with asking them to hit a time. So we actually ask them to go about 4 flat, 4 on the nose, and what you naturally see are guys taking the time that a play is giving them on the balls that get to them a little quicker, and then naturally catching and exchanging a little bit quicker on the balls that they either need to range a little further for, or that just take a little bit longer time to get to them. So all in all, this is a lot of micro stuff that helps shape our practice structure. Kai's now going to talk to some more macro topics that help shape his.
Thanks, Tuck. My first section is all about using game data to help us shape our practice plans. So first and foremost, why do we use game data? Why do we want to use game data? For me, it's all about anticipation versus reaction. Oftentimes as coaches, we react to the most recent game, the most recent mistake to shape our practice plan. Instead, I'd like to project what's going to happen over the course of the season and allot it appropriately. It's a great way to supplement our gut and our memory. A lot of times as coaches, we're fueled by bad beats, by something that happened in the 1995 title game to decide what we're going to do. Instead, that data can supplement that gut. In addition, it's great for advanced planning. We can plan our practices 1 week, 2 weeks, a month out at a time, and it's also really good to break up the traditional monotony of ground balls. So now that I know why I should use data, how should I use data? For me, it comes down to 4 primary categories: in-game frequency, current success rate, degree of difficulty, and the physical stress associated with a certain play. I should use those factors in game data to decide how often I practice something. So if how often something happens is a really, really important factor in planning how often I practice it, I need to know how often something happens. And so here's a nice little graphic that shows the distribution of outs that Major League infielders acquired last year. And as you can see, just about 2/3 of the outs are ground balls and throws to first base. But in addition to that, 18% are fly balls. A combined 13% are double plays. 4% are tags. And so although the vast majority belong to ground balls and throws to first base, in actuality, we probably practice that a little bit too much in comparison to the other tasks. How does that apply to me at my level? Right? Some people are going to say, well, Major League statistics don't necessarily apply to me. Well, we can do this and we can track this specific to your level. All it takes is a clipboard, right? So here's shortstop, for example. In spring training, all I did is that every time we had a lower level game and a shortstop made a play, I made a little mark on my board to tell me what play type it was. In addition to that, every time we made an error, I documented that error by type as well. So again, very low tech, takes no time at all. So now that we have this data, where the plays are distributed, where the errors are distributed, what do I do with it? Well, the next important thing when you're looking at data is understanding why those errors are occurring and the different reasons. I liken it to a race. If I'm a race car driver and I lose a race, there's a variety of different reasons that I can lose the race. But the two primary reasons to me is that my car's not handling right or the driver's not experienced to the track. Just like an infielder, if the car's not handling right, that means his current move is ineffective and inefficient. He needs to go back to the garage. You need to break it down, add a drill, add a cue, add film, and make that change. However, if his current move is actually effective and he's just inexperienced to the track, that's a really good time to just get back out there and make practice more like the game. Make it as close to the racetrack as possible. I'll have two sections later, one about the garage, one about making practice more like the track. Finally, how do we apply those two different sections? How do we distribute between the garage and the track? I'm a firm believer in starting with the garage, building up to the move so it's durable and repeatable, and then taking it out to the track second and applying it. And so here's a little demonstration of what we did in extended spring training, showing that the vast majority of April were drills and skill acquisition, and the vast majority of May were game-like exposure.
So yeah, we're going to shift gears here into some drill work now. I think everybody has some version of kneeling dry work and pick circuits, so with that in mind, we're going to talk about our hand circuits. And our hand circuits are basically just, like I said, our version of kneeling dry work, and there are three big things that we just try to keep our tabs on. One, we don't want them to be very taxing. We think that that's what's going to allow them to be an everyday drill package. Two, we want to be very cognizant about producing for our infielders reps that replicate what their eyes are being asked to read and react to on game day. And three, we just want to develop that trust and that confidence in our actions that we can play really aggressively on game day. So we think that there are 6 aspects to our hand circuits that are at least somewhat unique relative to the more standard pick circuit. The first of which is we ask our guys to transfer every single rep and get it to a position that we just call the infielder's checkpoint. All right, and all this position is a position for a lot of different reasons. We just feel that if we're able to get to quickly and consistently, it's just building a really good foundation and creating really good habits on both the catching front and the throwing front. So it's 3 big things. One, we're going to prep our arms for a really quick, compact arm action by establishing a tight V with that throwing side as quickly as we can. 2, we're going to take it a step further and ask that ball hand to get above our shoulder, and we're going to ask them to get their front side down and cleared. We'll see that in action here with one of our more simple themes, our hop theme. All right, so you'll see me fire big hops to these guys, roll snakes, and skip short hops. All the while, they're fielding every single rep, transferring every single one, and getting it to that infielder's checkpoint. Again, tight V on that throwing side, ball hand above their shoulder, front side down and cleared. We also want to tap into each one of our lanes. We do throw all of those hops into each one of these lanes, but for the sake of time today, we're just going to showcase that short hop. We also think it's a good opportunity to showcase the fact that we're not relegated to one type of glove action. You're going to see our guys press through that short hop in both the one-handed and the back-handed lane and funnel it in the two-handed lane. But regardless of the lane that they're working out of and regardless of the glove action that they're using, there is one theme consistent with short hops that we do ask our guys to just keep their tabs on. And that's the sound of the ball hitting the ground and the sound of the ball hitting their glove. We want to take the gap between those two sounds and close it as much as possible. So much to the point where those two sounds almost become indiscernible. So a little bit more like this. If we're able to establish that sound and create that sound, it's going to speak a little bit more to great glove position and great glove timing, which, truth be told, at least in my view, is every bit, if not more important than the glove action itself. We can also incorporate a glove tap to match up with what we do during a 4-step pattern. 4-step pattern is just our terminology for 2 shuffles worth of time. Obviously, a lot of different options that an infielder has when he has 2 shuffles worth of time. He can, catch and keep the ball in his glove for the entire play. He can catch, take it out early, and keep it out the whole time. Or he can catch, take it out, tap, and fire. All right, you have enough time to do that when you have 2 shuffles. We choose to utilize a glove tap for a few different reasons. 1, we think it keeps us really loose and athletic. 2, we think it keeps us in sync with our lower half. And 3, and most importantly, we think that it really encourages an early exchange that actually speaks and lays a really good foundation for when we do need to get rid of it quicker, like when we have a 2-step pattern or on the run. So this is just our platform to keep our tabs on that side of things. We're just asking these guys to keep it as compact and as subtle as possible. We can also utilize a collection of balls that are just a little bit more unpredictable in the way that they hop. All right, so if you look at our hand circuits bucket as a whole, I'd say about 60% of the balls that we use are taped. So I just take duct tape, I wrap it around the center of the ball to a point where the hops become a little bit more unpredictable, but not so much so that they're not game-like. We also have reaction balls, which are just amplified versions of those tape balls, and I think both of those do a really good job exposing bad glove action, exposing poor timing, and exposing bad glove position. We also have what we call camouflage balls there on the left, which from afar to our infielders, they look like those tape balls, but because they only have one roll of tape around them, they still bounce pretty true. And I think we do that just for two reasons. One, we want to keep them honest. We don't want them to develop any bad habits because they know a ball's about to bounce pretty routine. And also it's just some nice positive reinforcement for them to see how much more routine that true hop becomes the more that they practice with those more unpredictable ones. And last but not least, we can incorporate throwing into all this, all right? So we can take that catch and that transfer and blend it into our arm action to make hopefully what feels like one fluid movement. We don't want it to feel like three separate actions. So we can tap into every single one of those lanes. We can throw every single one of those hops into each one of these lanes. This particular guy is actually doing it at ratios that are very much relative to his strengths and his weaknesses. We're going to talk a little bit later about how we come to find out what those strengths and weaknesses are. But again, this is one way amongst those 5 others of doing a very low rigor, transferable drill package that we feel develops that sense of autopilot that we all want in our drills.
After we've completed kneeling work, I think there's a void there where we can add transition and ball security drills to help us segue into live reps. So we're going to dive into some examples of transition drills. First off, why would I do transition drills? For me, they're a great functional warm-up. They're a great priming activity that prepares us for what's to come. They're easily controlled and they're easily manipulated, so they can be used as a prescription model and changed for each infielder. They're great for limited space and limited time and can be done on the warning track in conjunction with ground balls. And they're great for cueing and correcting because of the proximity they put you with the fielder. So start off with the video. So the first video we're going to show here is just a stationary rapid fire catch. The first thing is there's a conditioning element to this where I'm forced to hold the triangular position. In addition to that, I like rapid fire drills because they create a certain level of cleanliness and efficiency. Right? If I am having extra movement with my catch or my exchange, it's going to be exposed by the next rep. Just like the kneeling work, this stationary drill can be done in all 3 lanes and all 3 hop types. From here, we're going to go to switches, right? And so it's all about adding a little bit of movement into that exact same drill. So we're switching back and forth from our one-handed lane to our two-handed lane. We can vary by hop type. We can do it on the backhand side and switch between open backhands and closed backhands. Just like the last drill, it's about establishing a triangular position and having an element of conditioning. And then we can go through all 4. We can go from one-handed to 2, to backhand open, to backhand closed, creating a comfort in all 3 lanes and all 4 footwork patterns. After that, we're talking about toe up, which is my favorite drill to try to establish a really good post-field move. I think we all coach infielders who stand straight up after they field the ball, and this is a really, really good drill to establish distance and direction. All I'm cueing the infielder to do is send his lead toe down when the ball makes glove contact, and naturally he'll replace his feet and create that nice rhythm towards the target. A nice progression from that, some call it flamingo, I call it leg up, and it's the exact same concept. Now we're trying to land our foot in a little heel-toe rhythm at the point of contact. After that, it's zigzag. In studying footwork patterns outside of the pre-pitch and the first step, to me, 4 of the most important steps are the first 2 steps right before you field the ball and the first 2 steps after you field the ball. And so this drill isolates those 4 steps and teaches you how to master the descent. When do I send my glove down? How do I slowly lower my body? You can also alter this by hop type. Here we're going every other between short hop and snake with a flat glove. Also, if I'm a youth or high school coach, and I can simplify this drill by doing it with a stationary ball and doing it from both right to left and left to right. But again, all about isolating those 4 steps. The last 2 pre-catch, the last 2 post-catch. Here's walk the line. I believe every infielder should possess the ability to field going forward and field going backward, especially because our glove actions becomes more subtle as we put ourselves in the move. So we've got infielders going forward on each side of their body, and we've got infielders going backward on each side of their body. And then here's a great little video of a guy doing zigzag in the background and a guy doing walk the line in the foreground. Just promoting that athleticism, promoting that rhythm, creating adjustability to move laterally and vertically. From here we got the weave, and it's just a nice little drill to learn and reinforce moving right to left. After that is the line drill, one of my favorite drills. The line represents the trajectory in which the ball is coming towards you, and all this is supposed to teach us is how little we have to get around. So instead of this creating this giant banana, all they're working on is clearing their left hip outside of that lane, getting one lane over, and having to get around as little as possible. Here's a descending version of that line drill, where as he gets closer and closer to the coach, he needs to increase the pace of his feet, but still clear the line. From here, here's a way where you can create variation in your transition drills. This is all about pace. So the tennis ball represents the slow pattern, the baseball represents a normal pattern, and the racquetball represents a fast pattern. So I'm creating adjustability and tempo in the same way that Tuck talked about 2 and 4-step patterns. So you can do this in all transition drills. In addition to that, you can use the multiple balls and have them associated with the target. So again, this can go for all drills. So in this case, the baseball means 1, the racquetball means 2, and the tennis ball means 4. And so you can do this in any drill, in any kind of rep. The variance in ball either means tempo or direction. From there, talking about ball security drills. And these are all those other components on that chart, the other 35% where we get outs. They're under-practiced skills. They help us bridge the gap to team defense. Just like transition drills, they're easily controlled. They're great for limited space and time. But more importantly, they create a versatile set of movements that can be used at multiple positions, making your group more athletic and more versatile as a whole. So the first type of ball security drill to me is redirecting. It's the ability to take a ball from one direction to another. So this is a little stationary redirect drill, and all he's learning is to differentiate between using 2 hands and using 1. Now we're choosing directions. When I flip it right-handed, he's going right. When I'm flipping left-handed, he's going left. Now we're going direction by ball. I believe all infielders should have the ability to redirect the ball in 4 different directions, and so he's using his eyes to identify which ball it is, and that ball is associated with a different base, and then he's making the move from there. From here, we've got a hack attack set up on the warning track, and I've got 5 cones set up down that line. So the near cone is an inside turn redirect, the second cone is a right turn redirect, the third cone is going to be a low relay, the fourth cone is going to be a short hop, and the fifth cone is going to be a long hop. You can manipulate the machine. On this day, I've got it at 80 miles per hour and just a little sinking right-handed fade, like from an average throwing right-handed outfielder. And why I use the cones is now we can create variation in terms of distance and ball flight. So not only are we having to manipulate the baseball and redirect it in 4 different directions, but we're also doing it at different heights. I love this drill because it's really adaptable. You can associate the different distance cones with different directions. You can send 2 guys out there at the same time to 2 different cones and practice the tandem relay. You can have guys pop out at different times and have it be random. You can have the machine be firmer. You can have the machine be softer. But like I said, it's a really good building block skill to be able to take the baseball at different heights and take it all 4 different directions. From there, the next style of ball security drill I really like is the stretch and the catch. So this is a little touch and go drill. So he's learning to manipulate the bag. He's tracking me with his eyes while knowing the width of the bag exactly, and then he's just going to stretch and go. From there, we're just doing some fungos. We want to be able to hit a 2-hop short hop. We want to be able to hit a 1-hop short hop. We want to be able to hit a 1-hop long hop, and we want to be able to hit it on the fly. So great variation to learning how to stretch and catch. Here we got a little 3-bag stretch and catch machine drill. So I've got the machine for uniformity's sake to bounce in the exact same spots, and then the players are creating variability by moving from one base to another. The left base is a forehand short hop, the middle base is a tweener, and the right base is a backhanded short hop. From there, the next type of ball security drill is tagging. So exact same concept, 3 bases, ball bounces in the exact same spot. The first one is a little walk, step, swipe, and go. The middle one is going to be a tweener hop that they're either going to come and get or ride backwards. And the last one is going to be a backhand pick and tag. So all about creating ways to get the plays we make in the game in a small space and still having some teaching cues and moments. Again, this can be done on the warning track, let's say with your junior varsity or half your infield, while the other half is on the field taking ground balls, and then after 5 minutes, you can easily switch between the 2 groups. From here, I love putting 3 cones out as targets to know where we're tagging. So when the catchers throw down, we could say middle, we could say back, but we're being very conscious of allowing the ball to travel, having as vertical tag as possible, and knowing where the runner is. I also like using soccer balls because you can manipulate them by pace and by direction, and so they're not aimlessly catching and tagging. From there, another ball security drill are DP flips and pivots. So this is a little 3-cone drill where they're learning to associate distance with the type of feed they're going to use to second base. As you can see, I've got a first baseman in there because he's going to have to be able to flip to short distances to the pitcher as well. This is a progressive drill, so it starts where the players know exactly what order they're going in, then it goes random, then it goes random fungo, then it goes fungo without the cones. But slowly but surely, they learn which ones are their strengths and weaknesses and how to be different from section to section. Here's a little 3-bag pivot drill that Billy Boyer inspired. All we're doing is putting a perfect feed over that middle bag, and from bag to bag, it's a different turn. So the back bag's coming through, the middle bag's the ideal feed, the front bag's going off the backside. Here we're doing that for shortstop as well. So making that inside turn redirect, the middle bag's the ideal feed, the back bag's the little glove side, the front bag's the little arm side. And as you get closer and closer to the machine, the feed's firmer and firmer. And then finally, fly balls. No footage of that.
Yeah, we'll shift gears for a bit from that drill work to just how we kind of collect data over the course of our practices. And we do a lot of tracking over the course of our practices at Yale, but I'd say the core of our infield data actually comes the last 10 minutes of our infield workouts. It's at that time that we ask all of our infielders, and yes, this does include our first baseman, we ask them to jump out to 3 different infield positions, and typically those are third, short, and second. It's at each of those spots that we're asking our guys to do a circuit of anywhere between 6 to 10 reps, and we are predetermining the lane that they're being asked to field out of, so 2-hand, 1-hand, or backhand, the target that they're being asked to throw to, so first base, second base, or home, and also the foot pattern that they're being asked to utilize, so 4-step, 2-step around the run. We're obviously going to shuffle up those variables every single day just to make sure that we're keeping it fresh and that we're also tapping into everything that we want and need to tap into at each position. But we're going to film that portion of practice utilizing GoPros, and we're going to track it the next day utilizing these report cards. I think the thing that initially jumps out to everybody when they see these report cards are those graphics. Those just represent those 3 circuits that we do. So I'll write reminders above each of those figures as to what the circuit was and where we did it. But this is essentially a 4-step process with these cards. The first of which is I sift through the film the next morning, all right, and I keep my eyes peeled for any type of error. All right, so any ball that we miss, any ball that we bobble, any ball that we throw away or even skip to first base, it's deemed an error. And step 1 is establishing whether or not it's a fielding or a throwing error. So if you notice below each of those graphics, I'm going to note whether or not it was a fielding or a throwing error. And at the end of the day, they're going to get a percentage purely on the fielding front and purely on the throwing front. Step 2 is regardless of whether or not it was a fielding or a throwing error, I'm going to note what lane it occurred in. So again, whether 2-hand lane, 1-hand, or backhand, and also what hop they worked themselves into. All right, so big hops, snakes, short hops, but this is also my platform to note when guys are working things into an in-between hop. All right, step 3 is tallying up all those results, not just on the micro level like we mentioned earlier, but also on a macro level that you'll see above. And the 4th step, the most important step, is on the bottom. It's just any notes, feedback, reminders, suggestions based on what we are seeing in the video and what we think is appropriate for each guy. And by doing these report cards every day, I think 2 big things come out of them. 1, I think we do a really good job keeping tabs on our guys both individually and as a group. It's essentially our compass from day to day and week to week in regards to our practice design. And 2, if we do it regularly and accurately over a very long stretch of time, we can really figure out where our guys are really strong and where they're not so strong. So we do it on the fielding front and the throwing front. This is our fall fielding assessment, so this takes all of those filmed reps for the entire fall season. And it takes all of this particular player's fielding errors, and it shows it in a very macro view over there on the left. Okay? We're going to take that macro view and we're going to break it down on more of a micro level by hop, by lane, and by foot pattern. And having done this now for a few years, we notice some things that are pretty common and consistent across the board with most infielders. But inevitably, with every guy you do this for, you're going to notice something that's unique to him. For this particular player, he's pretty darn strong across the board, but for a lot of different reasons, he tends to break down in his 1-hand lane more than the other 2. So we can show this to him, explain it to him in a way that hopefully he understands, and we can keep our tabs on him in the practice setting as a result. We could also show it on the throwing front. So again, a more macro view of all of this particular player's misfires on the left. All right, and we're going to break down that macro view on more of a micro level by foot pattern, by lane, and also by momentum. We think momentum is a huge factor in throwing. So we visually note whether or not guys are working with momentum that's taking them to their right, momentum that's taking them to their left, or if they're dealing with somewhat just neutral momentum. It's something we track this entire fall. And again, like the fielding side of things, you're going to notice some things the more that you do this that are pretty common and consistent amongst most infielders. But inevitably, you're going to see some things that are unique to every single guy. This guy's actually a two-way guy for us. He pitches as well. And what we notice here is that when he's given a lot of time, particularly in his four-step pattern, he kind of gravitates towards that same tall, upright posture that he likes to take while he's on the bump. And he gets a higher slot because of it. And he spikes a lot of balls as a result. So again, we can show this to him in a way that helps explain it to him. And we'll keep our tabs on him in the practice setting as a result. And having done this now for 3 years, I think there are 3 major takeaways from it all. The first of which is I think we've really been able to identify what's truly unique to every single infielder. Some really good examples of that are their best and their worst lane. I think we went into it assuming that everyone's two-handed lane was their best. Definitely not the case. All right, that hierarchy of lanes, two-hand, one-hand, backhand, is absolutely unique to every single guy. Where and how a thrower misfires, definitely unique to every single player. Whether it be lower body issues, upper body issues, arm action issues, there's a ton of variables that go into how and when a thrower misfires. What guys do with or without time is super unique to them. Okay, so sometimes bad habits are exposed with time constraints. Sometimes those bad habits come out when you give a player a lot more time. So again, unique to every guy. And last but not least, the role that body type and mobility play. Definitely a hot topic, I think, in the hitting world right now that we definitely see parallels to on the defensive side of the ball. How your body can or can't move is going to dictate how it can or can't move in the infield. Number 2, we have a much more improved practice structure, and this is not just in terms of identifying our weaker parts of the game and feeding those, although that's obviously a big part of it, but I think it's cool that we have a system in place that allows us to track our stronger parts and make sure that at the very least they're still being maintained and hopefully improving themselves. And third, and this is honestly the coolest part of this whole tracking system, it's the fact that we can develop a game day approach that's really unique and relative to each one of our infielders. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there's going to be a lot of plays that we're given in the infield where the ball's going to dictate what hop we have to field, what lane we got to field out of, and what foot pattern we got to utilize. And we're going to prepare accordingly for those demands. But there are a lot of plays that I think as infield coaches we take for granted how flexible they are. All right, and if we know where our players' strengths are in terms of hops and lanes and foot patterns, we can kind of help them pinpoint and identify those more flexible plays and teach them to play to their strengths and stay away from their weaknesses. And at the end of the day, we're going to develop an approach that just makes us a little bit more productive and a little bit more efficient on game days, which is the whole purpose for all this stuff. So whether it be an approach, whether it be subtle positioning, again, it starts with doing these report cards on a daily, regular basis. And if you do them over a long stretch of time, this is the information that you can play with in a variety of different ways. So it's a system that we believe in that's worked for us and can't recommend it enough.
Thanks, Doug. So now that we've acquired those skills in the garage, kind of wanted to wrap up with how we can make practice more like the racetrack, how we can make practice and our reps more game-like. So my favorite thing to use to make practice reps more game-like is using batted ball data from the major leagues and reverse engineering it. So here are ground balls against the Indians last season. So the first thing we're going to talk about is handedness. So like you'd assume, the vast majority of balls hit to the right side infielders were hit by lefties, and the vast majority of balls hit to the left side infielders were hit by righties. Now we're going to talk about spin. As you can see across the board, over 80% of ground balls hit to all 4 positions are hit with top spin. Less than 20% are hit with backspin, and then a small percentage are considered weak contact. And finally, launch angle and exit velo. You can start to see a picture emerge, a glaring difference between your middle infielders and your corner infielders. The middle infielders are getting flatter, lower trajectory ground balls at a firmer velocity, while the corner infielders are getting averagely hit ground balls at a steeper launch angle. They're getting gnarly top spin. They're going to get balls that they're going to have moved forward and backward on. So how do we make sense of this data? The first is handedness. We need to take advantage of both right and left-handed fungo hitters, whether it's coaches or pitchers, in the same way we take advantage of right or left-handed BP throwers. We need to use machines or direction to create spin. We need to be conscious to hit top spin as opposed to always hitting backspin. And we need to be conscious in manipulating the launch angle of the ball we hit to the middle infielders versus the ball we hit to the corners. And then finally, we need to manipulate our batting practice groups so that your starting right side infielders are on the field shagging when your lefties hit. Another type of batted ball data that's really important to use are heat spray maps. So here's Andrelton Simmons' heat spray map from last season versus Nolan Arenado's heat spray map from last season. So the glaring difference that applies, distinguishes the corner from the middle is the size and the shape of the spray. So it becomes very obvious that the third baseman, the first baseman, their map is an oval and it's more vertical. They are challenged forward and backward. And so you should do the same when you hit them ground balls. The shortstop, his heat map, and the second baseman, his heat map is wider, it's flatter, so he should be challenged in practice laterally. In addition to batted ball details, another way of making our ground ball reps more like the game is incorporating decision making. More times than not, as coaches, we get frustrated in the game, not by a physical mistake, but by a decision making mistake. Why did he rush when he didn't have to? Why did he throw to 2 when he should have gone to 1? But my question to you is, why did you not practice that? We spend so much time practicing the physical and very little time practicing the decision making. How do we practice decision making? We need to provide context. Context is king. Every rep they take, once they've acquired that skill, should be done in the context of the scoreboard. Well, how many outs are there? Are we winning? Are we losing? What inning is it? Who's hitting? Who's running? What depth are we in? What position are we in? And then we should use that context to start establishing priorities. Right? Am I trying to prevent run here, or am I trying to get outs? Am I trying to be aggressive here, or am I trying to be conservative? If I start baking that into my ground balls, my guys are more prepared to make those decisions in the game. Right? How do we do that from a rep standpoint? I'm a firm believer in random, open-ended reps. And what that means is oftentimes we all go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, backhand, 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 2, 2, 2, 2, and they learn the order more than they learn the decision. You should say there's a guy on first, hit a ground ball. If it's hard, they turn 2. If it's a chopper, they go to 1. If they dive, they get a force at second. Make these reps open-ended. Allow them to make decision what base they go to. Here's a little 15-minute routine that covers, for me, most of the decisions you're going to make in the game. Going from infield in and runners in second and third, going from halfway, runners on first and third, going to double play depth with first and second, and then going back. And then all you have to do is hit different types of ground balls and different directions and provide a different score and a different out, and that'll create a dialogue between you and the players. Hey, why'd you go there? Hey, maybe you should have gone there. Hey, maybe you should have gone faster. Hey, maybe you should have gone slower. And you can cross-check with your stopwatch. You can create variance on the spin with different fungo hitters and machine. And all in all, you've taken your ground ball reps and marched them closer to that racetrack. Now they're fielding game-like ground balls, and they're making game-like decisions.
Really appreciate you guys coming out this morning. I only saw one guy fall asleep in the front row. Those are great percentages, so appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.